It's just gone 13 hours GMT. We begin in Tokyo, where the greatest show on Earth has finally now got underway. Postponed last year because of the global pandemic. The 2020 Summer Olympic Games are a symbol of global unity and national pride. And during these unprecedented times, a moment when the world's greatest athletes show their strength, solidarity and courage. More than 11,000 of them from 200 nations will be competing without spectators under unprecedented restrictions. The Parade of Nations is underway this hour in what is a nearly empty stadium. There are a small number of foreign guests and dignitaries at the ceremony, the US First Lady Jill Biden and the French President Emmanuel Macron among them. The most expensive Summer Olympics in history is deeply unpopular among the people of the host nation. Nearly 80% of Japanese people say they are against holding the Games during this global health crisis. Live now to Al Jazeera's Andy Richardson, who's in Tokyo for us. So, Andy, just looking at the initial scenes from the opening ceremony, it just looked so different.
It really did, sort of scaled down, socially spaced and subdued somewhat. I mean, opening ceremonies, you can take them or leave them to an extent. Some people would question the wisdom at the best of times of spending upwards of $100 million on an enlarged firework display, but they do often set the tone for an Olympic Games, often shift public opinion back behind the Games, and these organisers really do have a huge job to do if the majority of the people of Japan are going to turn around their preconceptions about what's happening here in Tokyo and get fully behind the Games. Worth noting, actually, you were talking about the Parade of Nations. The countries Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, their athletes entering the national stadium, almost none of their athletes were wearing facial masks. Now, ahead of the Games, media, athletes were handed something called the Olympic Playbook, effectively a list of rules and regulations about what you can and can't do. There's a lot you can't do. One of the things you can't do is take your mask off in a public place. The only time you can take your mask off is if you're sleeping, eating or competing. So already the challenges of trying to maintain these safe and secure games, as they're described by the IOC, coming to the fore. And there'll be some interesting questions at the first briefing of the International Olympic Committee tomorrow to see what sanctions those two countries could face. Because in theory, athletes were told ahead of the Games, if you don't follow the rules, you could be kicked out of the Olympics. And here we are in front of billions of people around the world, millions of people around the world, and two countries have come in not wearing facial masks in the what are effectively going to be called the COVID-19 Games. If we're looking for positives, I think gender parity is the one thing that we're seeing at this opening ceremony. 49% of athletes at these Olympics will be female. That's the highest number we've ever had. And for each country coming into the national stadium, for the first time, there's an option of having a male and a female athlete to carry the flag, and most countries were doing that. So some positives to take out of it, but also just a lot of tension and uncertainty around Tokyo on a night when it should have been a night of celebration for the country.
And when we start seeing the full-on competitions taking place, those track and field events inside the stadium, Andy, such an odd situation for the competitors, because not only do they have to do face masks and social distancing, but they don't kind of move into the Olympic Village for a period of 4, 5 or 6 weeks. They fly in 4 or 5 days before their event, and then once their event has taken place, 2 or 3 days later, they're gone. They're on a plane home, maybe.
That's right, and it's another one of the reasons why the athletes' ceremony tonight is somewhat scaled down, because the athletes are told they're not allowed to arrive in the athletes' village until 5 days before, and then 48 hours after that they have to leave it. So it's not exactly going to be the usual atmosphere of celebration and conviviality around the athletes' village. And also, the athletes living under this constant fear of getting COVID-19, or in a situation like the opening ceremony tonight where they're surrounded by athletes from other countries. If one of those athletes does subsequently test positive for COVID-19, they could be identified as a close contact, and then who knows what? They have to train in isolation, they have to go through repeated PCR tests, and if that happens on a day of competition, their 5-year dream of competing at these Games goes up in smoke. So much tension and concern around these Games, not just for the organisers, but also for all the athletes involved as well.
Andy, many thanks. We'll talk to you later, I'm sure. In the meantime, thank you, Andy Richardson, there joining us live from the Olympics in Tokyo.